All right, welcome again, Tom. So glad to have you on the channel to discuss evidence for the non-existence of God. And so glad you could join us. And let's just dive right in. Thought you would kind of kick us off, and then we can have a dialogue regarding those talking points. So, welcome.
Perfect. Thank you for having me back again. I definitely enjoy chatting with you guys and being here. So I had a few things written down, and it was a tough, kind of a weird, tough task to kind of disprove a negative. I've never done it before. I'll be honest with you. So I've always put the onus on the person making the positive assertion that they have the onus is on them to prove whatever that positive assertion is. Whereas we kind of took a little bit of a different approach today for me to try to take the opposite approach and try to essentially prove a negative, which I kind of had to take a step back and realize, okay, what exactly are we talking about? So when we use the word God, obviously there is a multitude of different meanings, interpretations, definitions to that word. It means essentially different things to everyone that can utter the word. From the faithful to the non-faithful, everyone has a different concept of what this thing or what this word even means, and we can go by the dictionary definition. But I had essentially four words I think describe what I think even you would agree with what God is. First is uh, omnipotent, so all powerful. I think that is essentially a good definition of what any god would be. Omniscient would be another one, all knowing. Next one would be omnibenevolent, would be all good. And the last one would be omnipresent, which would be there for essentially ever, something that's been there since the beginning of time. So the issue that I have with each of these, I'll kind of outline for us here. If something is omnipotent, now the question that arises is, can an omnipotent being create, say, a stone that's too heavy that he can't lift it? So if the answer is yes, then he has limited powers to move it. If the answer is no, he has limited powers to create it. So by definition, an omnipotent being cannot exist, just by the contradiction in the actual meaning and what can actually be done. Omniscient.
Response to that?
Go right ahead. Yep.
I just think so. This omnipotent idea is God being all powerful, or the first cause of
Yes.
the universe, the creator. Um, Part of what I've tried to think through that attribute of God as the all powerful creator of everything is that there is an absolute to God's power as far as God calls the shots, defines all the terms, brings about existence and time, space, and matter, but is also outside of that. But then also that there is a ordered power, if that makes any sense. That there's a type of power, like going back to your, can God make a rock so big that he can't lift it? That there is some type of categorical error there. That we're talking about a God who is all powerful, who could do anything, and we're saying, well, yeah, but there's limits to God's power. Well, at least within the Christian tradition, it would say there is an ordered power. God becoming a baby as Jesus, like that's kind of a mystery, or at least a ordered
It's still
power.
part of it. It's still part of the Trinity, right? Of Jesus, God, and the Holy Spirit. So it's not just God becoming a baby.
Right.
He's still part of this Trinity, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Right, but God is entering time and space, is taking on a material form as a human being. There's still an order of power there. Jesus wasn't everywhere at all times. He was a real human being who walked and ate and lived and walked about in this existence with ordered power.
Okay, so
That's my thoughts to that objection of, well, can God make a rock so big that he can't lift it?
But if something is all powerful, then doesn't that truly mean that he can create anything at any point? Like, okay, here's a rock that I can't lift. Now I've given myself more powers that I can lift it.
Well, so that's a good
Wouldn't you
question.
think that an all-powerful being essentially could do anything? If he can will this universe into existence, then why couldn't he make a rock that's so big that he can't create or he can't lift it in that moment, but in the next moment he's now given himself more powers and he can now lift it?
I mean, conceptually, it would make sense that if an all powerful being could create this universe, then he can intervene and suspend the natural laws that he set in motion to create something else. But this idea of it just being an ordered power is what I'm getting at, is that God is entering time, space, and matter in such a way that we can begin to understand or get to know God to a degree. But there's a certain
But I've heard your dad say that God is outside time, space, and matter on numerous occasions.
well, right. He's. I think that gets to your omnipresence point, that God
Yeah.
is everywhere.
Yes.
So that's kind of tied into his all powerful attribute, his omnipotence as
So, but
well.
how can you be okay? So then, how can you be an all powerful God and be a all unknowing baby at the same time? Doesn't that a major contradiction?
Well, it's not a contradiction if there is such a thing as ordered power, in the sense that God is saying, okay, I'm taking on the very being and likeness of what I've created as a human being to reveal myself. And at the same time, like you said, mentioning the Trinity being outside of time and space and matter, and still being omnipresent, even though there's an ordered power to it and coming into this earth as a baby.
I just don't understand how you can have all of those in the same being. Like how do you put a baby and something that's all powerful and something that has now limited powers all in the same, I don't know, some package?
Which part is most confusing about it for you?
All of it. How do you combine all of these into one? How can you have an all powerful being? How can you have something that has limited powers, and then how can you have something that has no powers, like a baby, all into one package?
So we say that is borderline irrational, right? Okay, so that it gets at too our intellect and our ability to say that we have a free will and choice.
Well,
And
that
so,
actually goes on to my next point. So good.
right. I figured that's where we were going, but that kind of going into, well, if we're made in the image of God, then God has a free will, a rational reason for
Hmm.
creating the way that the first cause did, um, and putting order to this universe that we can comprehend it. But go ahead with your
All right.
next point.
So my next one was actually conscience versus free will. And I said basically, how can a God know what will happen if we or it has the free will to change the outcome? Those two cannot coexist in the same being. How can you be all knowing and have free will, and have us have free will and know what's going to happen in the future at the same time?
I
You,
know this analogy sort of falls short, but I'll try it anyways. As far as the producer of a film
mhm.
creates characters, and while we are watching it from the outside, we would argue, yeah, they have some free will, some autonomy, and just because the producer knows the ending doesn't mean that in the midst of the what's going on in the great drama, that there's still people making contributions and making choices and free will decisions, but that's still not contradicting, how the producer will bring it to an end.
But what if the producer has no idea what the end, or what if the producer is so tossed by a curveball that the ending is dramatically changed? Like, for instance, in the case of a mass shooting,
Hmm.
where now the lives of multiple people have either ended or changed very dramatically, taken a complete 180 turn as a
Hmm.
result of this tragedy. And did the producer foresee this?
That's a really good question. Because if the producer had foreseen it, then wouldn't that imply that the producer is at least in part
Or
malevolent,
liable?
more liable, or
At
complicit?
least liable?
Right, complicit in
Maybe
it.
complicit? Yeah.
Um, to that, I would respond back to the ordered power. Is there really is seems to be an order of God limiting His power and giving us a free will, and us having rationale and consciousness and an ability to reason and make choices.
But I mean, is God willing to prevent evil but not able?
So, is God willing to prevent evil but not able?
Yes.
Well, that gets right to the cross, I think, because if the cross, well, the cross happened as far as it was a form of capital punishment that
Yep.
the Roman Empire used.
Yep.
But if Jesus did was crucified and then rose from the dead, that means that, at least from what I can see, is that it might not be an answer to the evil of mass shootings, but it is a response. And I don't think that's a form of hair splitting. I really think that that response is taking evil for what it is and defeating it and turning death on itself, hatred in on itself. And I think that's what we so often notice about hatred is that it's acidic. It corrodes the very person who holds on to it. It's self-defeating. And the same with, yeah, a lot of some of the ideologies out there of just total hatred. They seem to just corrode in on themselves.
Okay. Now, I just have a few more points written down here. And I basically said, if an omnibenevolent God wants all good, or essentially no evil, but doesn't do anything to change it, then either God is not all good or isn't all powerful. It's either one or the other.
Mhm.
So to say that he's limited his powers just in this realm of things to prevent, excuse my language, shitty things from happening to good people,
Mhm.
potentially,
Mhm.
maybe even, quite faithful people,
Mhm.
happens all the time. What about the people that were, I think, in Haiti when when some earthquake happened and they were all in a church and it came tumbling down on them and killed, I think, 90% of the congregation.
Mhm.
I, I mean, excuse me, I'm not trying to laugh, but it just
Mhm.
seems completely, ironic that something like that could happen.
Mhm.
Why couldn't God keep that church from coming down? If he can make the universe, why not step in at this time and just stop that building from coming down? No one else could have potentially even known about it. Just work your invisible magic, invisible hand of God, and stop that building from coming down.
So would you say that that therefore is evidence that God doesn't exist? Just
Oh,
kind of
it's a
disappointment over
it's a
that?
good one. I mean, it's not like there's any reason or rationale why one person lives and another person doesn't. At the end of the day, I remember as I was in my early 20s, my family doctor and his wife were traveling on the highway up here, and they got decapitated on the highway.
Mm.
And I was like, okay, what just happened here? I just lost my family doctor, and his wife is gone. Like, they got decapitated. I'm like, what? Like,
Right.
and just, it was a completely freak accident on the highway, with a flatbed tow truck that it was just one of those things, and no one could have avoided it, and it just happened.
Right.
It's like, why couldn't something, if God is everywhere, omnipresent, and sees it all happening, just you know, I don't know, 3 feet would have saved these people's lives.
Hmm.
I'm not talking a big deal, 3 feet.
Right. So I think a couple points to that. You're
Really?
highlighting the randomness in life, right? How random and
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's not like this is happening to bad people. This was a family doctor and his wife. They're going on the highway.
right,
It's not like they were deserving of anything remotely close to that kind of fate.
right. So you're highlighting the randomness of life, the chance. It would seem that just what is going on here? Why is there? It just doesn't seem like there's much design. And two, I think in both those instances, you're saying, okay, death should have been avoided for whether it's the church or that car accident. Um, but in some ways, it's like, well, why? It seems like the pattern of this world is bent towards everything dies. And so you're highlighting too that you have some kind of utopian
Well,
target.
life is a struggle. Let's not, it's not something that's been given to us on a silver platter. You have to want it
Right.
to for us to gain any kind of to get further in it, to get a betterment for our children and for the next generation. We have to want to do it. It's not just, oh, it's going to come no matter what. Well, it's not. Scientific knowledge has not just come because somebody sat around. Someone had to go around and figure things out.
Right.
So you're not going to get that from religion, unfortunately, because as far as religion, I think is reactive in this respect, because it's trying to make its theories fit what the now accepted scientific norms are, so it doesn't seem so out to lunch and outdated that it's not really in touch with reality anymore, like the earth being round and any number of things. With us revolving around the sun, they didn't want to believe it for how long until they simply had to, so as like not to literally look ridiculous. So again, I think religions are reactive in that respect because they're constantly trying to make the theories fit what today's knowledge shows. Whereas what science does is predictive. It makes predictions into the future, what may or may not happen based on the theories we have. And if it works, we go on and we learn from that. And again, I think one leads us into a good future, and one keeps us stagnant, like as the case is in the Islamic world, where it stopped after that one cleric basically said that the working with numbers is the work of the devil, and
Right.
everything stopped. So
Mhm.
it's not like this is something that's unproven or something that's it's clearly documented that when religious dogma says that don't do this anymore, that any knowledge in the field is now gone. It doesn't continue on because they're scared. Bottom line.
Well, sure. In response to that, regarding science versus faith, I think you can only go so far with your belief in science being just a all good endeavor. Um, I think there's been enough abuses of science, whether it's
I agree.
eugenics or whatever it might be, that you have to say, okay, well, so let's put some checks and balances there, because I don't think it's fair to say that religion is just all reactive, as if we're just scared of death and we're trying to deal with the darkness. I think it is proactive as well, as far as um, helping people to think through why do I have desires and why aren't they being fulfilled. um,
What predictions can religion make that come true about reality? Something that you can actually substantiate.
before we get to that, were there any other last points you wanted to make
Yeah.
about inspiration?
So yeah, it's basically like the omnipresent point. if
Uh,
if you've accepted the fact that your God is omnipresent and has been there since the beginning,
mhm.
you accept the idea of something already being there for, say, eternity.
Right.
So why not just transfer that same notion that you've given to God to simple existence? What if what we know as the universe today is basically a series of expansions and contractions over and over and over again? We could have gone through multiple Big Bang cycles
Right.
that we don't know because we're still in a state of expansion right now, right?
Mhm.
So if that process of, again, the expansion and contraction has been around forever, that the idea of eternity is there. You already understand. You've already acknowledged. You're okay with the idea of something being there forever, since the beginning of time, with your God. Now you just need to transfer that to the existence of everything that we know, just always being there, no matter what. There didn't need to be a cause.
Well, the challenge I have for
If you
that,
don't need a cause for your God, then
right,
we don't need a cause for the universe.
but there's still the mystery of consciousness,
Why?
of human consciousness, of this notion of having a reason and a rational mind and choice, and all these other things. Because I think with eternity, yes, I can ascribe to, okay, there's a theory of the universe having a beginning, or like you're saying here, maybe it doesn't, maybe it's eternal. Um, I still don't see how we get all of this, all of these immaterial ideas regarding consciousness, thought, or conscience, like human, like moral reasoning.
What if it's all to the point of completely insignificant? Like to the point of asking, why is a mountain where it is? Because it is.
Well, I don't think it's totally insignificant, because it you would, I think, Tom, if you look at something like the French Revolution and the kind of the cult of reason that was celebrated then, people were getting pretty hostile and intolerant to any sort of notion of belief or faith or whatnot. And it was all in the name of progress, enlightenment, and science, and so on and so forth. It's like, I think we're kind of going back and forth on, okay, which which idea are we going to champion as one that contributes to human flourishing, but also takes into account what's true, what's this notion of an afterlife that we all seem to have.
We don't.
You just
I
mentioned
don't.
that we all have eternity as like a concept.
Okay, having an idea in your head as a concept is one thing, but thinking that your anything is eternal is silly.
So then the universe has a beginning.
Well, there's different scientific theories that are still tabled. That there's basically competing scientific theories that are tabled mutually, that are kind of exclusive. I mean, look at Einstein's theory of relativity and quantum mechanics. They
Hmm.
don't coincide at all. And in fact, they quite don't like each other, because things happen on a quanta scale that make no sense. And I mean zero sense, like things existing in two places at the same time. In
Hmm.
quantum mechanics, this happens.
Hmm.
Whereas in our reality, it's impossible. So
But that
there,
only adds weight to the what is seen rests upon that which is unseen.
okay, but so if we can go as far back as that first moment of singularity, and
Hmm.
you and I agree on all the scientific notions, ideas, laws that have led us to where we are today, and how old the Earth is, and all the laws of physics and
Right.
gravity, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, all the everything we know. The only thing that you and I basically are missing right now is what happened at that first point. So that is essentially where I see the God of the gaps right now in our conversation. Is that's the gap, that singularity. If once science explains that singularity, have you now switched over to the dark side?
Switched over to the, well, I I think it's fascinating that you call it the dark side, because really it is
I'm
about.
joking. I'm joking. Obviously.
Well, no, I know, but thinking through something like light, and holding to this idea of, in the beginning, God created the skies and the earth and everything else, and then let there be light. There's still too much of a pattern of predictability when it comes to the order in the universe and everything else, that would seem to say, okay, we got to have some type of intelligent mind back here at that point of singularity that you're talking about, because from our experience, from our observation, from accumulating all this thousands of years, it would seem that the theory now, at least, is that the universe has a beginning.
Okay, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it had to have had a cause.
Why is that? Okay, so you're right. Okay, so what would be the evidence for it not having a cause?
It didn't need to have one because like I said, in quantum mechanics, which is what we're talking about at that point of a singularity.
Wouldn't you say that's unscientific to say that it didn't need to have one? Aren't we? We're continually
Well, no,
looking.
I know what I'm trying to say is because quantum mechanics reacts in certain ways that honestly looks like things don't have causes. That's what I'm trying to say. So if we use the quantum mechanic kind of model to look at that singularity, then it's going to act like more like quantum mechanics and not have properties that we can see as having any causes. That's what I'm trying to see what I'm trying. It's not acting on a macro scale. It's acting on a quantum scale where things do not make sense to us. How things cannot exist in two different spots at the same time. It boggles our mind. But it is true in quantum mechanics. And again, when you're talking about the singularity, that's exactly where we're at. Is that weird?
Wait, do you think
that weird element of science that only a sliver of humanity understands?
Well, do you think that lends weight to the argument for the Trinity, as far as God being in two places at once, or in many places?
Well, then again, if he's going to limit his powers, what's the point? If you can see everything, but you're going to limit yourself to not being able to do it, to do anything about it, what's the point of seeing it? Just so you can drive yourself crazy and not being able to, like, you tied one hand behind your back and now you're just going to walk around looking of what you can't do anymore? I don't understand what's the purpose of behind that.
Could it also be an invitation to the creation, to others around, to participate in creative powers?
But why do it in code? Why not just come flat out and say it if you want it done that way?
It's fascinating you mentioned code, because I think that, like, the human DNA and the mapping of it, it's a very, like, just complex but very functionally specified pattern. It's a sequence.
I know, but it's flawed. Okay, that's why you age.
Okay, so sure, yeah, it has breakdowns in it, but it still implies a past action of an intelligent mind, of something that wound it up in the first place.
And that's a horrible designer.
But even if that mental agency can't be observed by us, it would still imply
that's a horrible designer, Rob.
Well, but that's a utopian objection, Tom, of saying, well, we should have been able to live for 1,000 years with nothing wrong.
But I mean, to design DNA so it degrades and we get older and we essentially die of some crappy disease. Why not design us in some way that, I don't know, I can die with a smile, like, I don't know, just, it's lights out, so you don't have to die of some disease like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or cancer that generally affects older people as they get into age. Why is that part of the grand design? It seems like a horrible design, and it doesn't seem like any amount of thought went into it at all. I can think of a better design right now. There. Am I now smarter than God because I thought of a better design?
Well, what is it? Is it heaven?
No, but just get rid of the crappy diseases that plagues old people and let them pass with some dignity. Why have them forget who they are?
Well, so if you're going to say it's thoughtless at best and cruel at worst, then you're really getting at that whatever mental agency it was that created.
But if God, like, again, keep in mind, we're talking about something that is truly utopian because God is all good.
Right.
In your definition, God is all good. So yes, we are talking about something that's theoretically utopian, of course.
Hmm.
If I were designing something that was better than what God designed, I would do X, Y, and Z, and now we have a better system.
Right, but I just want it to look at this too as like, okay, we're still pushing the ball down the road as far as look, that is not right to see somebody with Alzheimer's or with dementia or whatever it is lose their dignity and die the way they do. We want to try to find a cure for it. I mean, I
But
think,
why is it there in the first place? That's what I'm trying to get at. Why design that in the first place? If you're the ultimate designer, you made this. The devil didn't create Alzheimer's or dementia. No, it was part of your DNA design. You made it. Why did you create this problem?
so if it
And once you realize there is a problem, hello, there's a problem, fix it.
right. Well, and that gets back to okay, will it be fixed one day or not? Like, is there an afterlife or is there not? Is this
Again,
is
why
this all
why why is it taking so long and letting how many people suffer for no apparent reason other than his entertainment? I don't know. What is it?
well? I
Is
think
it?
if you look at the reading or the writings of Albert Camus or Jean-Paul Sartre, some of these atheists who I frankly respect more of their intellectual work than I do any of the new atheists. I feel like the new atheists are just not really very appealing.
Okay.
They reached the conclusion that life is a tragic absurdity. Uh, all these desires we have for our loved ones live on.
They are correct.
Well, right, but they also are saying like, okay, we have these desires and are not being fulfilled, and yet humans yearn for the transcendent. Um,
Some
so
do, not everybody. I don't think.
well,
I don't want to live forever. I
no,
don't
but
want. I don't want my kids growing up to think that I will live forever. I think that's a childish idea. I want them to know that obviously not at this age, but at a certain point, I'm not going to be here forever. I want you guys to be confident in life and be able to carry on once I'm not here. Of course, I don't want them to think that there's going to be some daddy figure over top of them watching what they're going to do all for. Come on, that's silly.
how are those two related? You wanting competency for your children versus you grappling with whether or not the afterlife is true.
Well, what I'm trying to say is I can only teach them what I want to, and the knowledge that I want to basically convey to them to live a confident life and be able to progress as opposed to not. I don't understand really the question. I'm sorry.
Well, I guess the question being, I don't see how they're related. Like, yes, that's great that you want to raise competent human beings, but how is that relevant to the question posed to you of is there an afterlife? Is there a God? Because I think that so often
It doesn't has no relationship to it. Tell you the truth,
right,
because
it doesn't. So what's then your kind of response to, or what kind of evidence do you pose for saying that there's no afterlife? There's no death is it, and that's all.
um, I mean, it might sound funny, but knowing the way my dad was, and he was a pretty staunch non-believer, I'll say that. If there was something after the fact, he would have come back to tell me that there would have. I haven't. No one. Nothing supernatural exists. That's why it's called supernatural, because it's outside of what we understand, of what we can see, or what we can observe, or anything. I've never seen anything. I don't know anyone that's seen anything. I don't. It just it's a myth. Supernatural, anything is a myth to me. So the afterlife is also a myth to me. Once your hard drive quits, you're
Mhm,
done. Just like any other computer. That's what you are, a biological computer
mhm,
with moving parts,
mhm.
right? So again, there is no afterlife for broken down computers. There is no afterlife for broken down anything.
Hmm.
Once you're done, you're done. It's just you're a biological organism that once your time is up, once your system, your heart has ticked its amount of ticks it's gonna for the lifetime, it's over. I hope you've enjoyed the time you had. I hope you've made the best of it. I hope you've passed the knowledge on to someone that can carry that further than what you have.
Hmm.
But that's it. That's what you got. Enjoy it.
When you say that, it sounds very um, courageous, and but the part that I have a hard time grappling with is, how do you not just logically go to despair and
It's easy, but you got to fight it. That's why you want to. That's why again, life is not about someone giving it to you on a silver platter. You got to want it.
Mhm.
It's easy to fall into despair and think, oh my, I can just end it all by jumping off a bridge and that's it. My life is done and I don't have to care about anything else. Sure,
Mhm.
I'm. Of course, it happens daily. People commit suicide.
Mhm.
You got to want it. You got to want to live.
I think that you're tying into a desire
To
for
live.
to live, sure, but there's
Sure.
also a faith in that life is a good gift or a good
Well,
action, to choice to
it's
make. Because I think
it's
if you
the only
go,
life you have, so you better enjoy it and make the best of it. As far as I'm concerned, I mean that's the only logical way of looking at it. I don't
well,
see why you want to make the worst of it.
isn't that a faith claim though too? Is saying like
What?
that this life is all we have, so you better make the best of it. Like
Not a
that.
faith claim at all. That's what you can prove. That's what I can prove to you. That this life is all you have. That's what you can prove to me, and that's what I can prove to you. You can't prove anything else, and I can't prove anything else.
So how do you prove it?
You are born and you will die, and what is in between is your life. That's what we can quantifiably prove. Correct?
Sure, that from a numerical standpoint, yeah,
Yeah,
but
that's it. That's what we have. From a date to date. You were born on X date and you will die on Y date. And what you have in between is the sum of your life.
so outside of those, before your birth and after your death is just a big mystery, right? Or is it a
There,
certainty?
there's no mystery. It's nothing. There is nothing. You can't be something when you're not.
How can you be so sure?
Very easily. I don't remember before I was born. I was dead for billions of years
Mhm.
before I was alive. Didn't seem like that bad a place. I'm
Mhm.
going to be going back there once I'm dead.
Mhm.
It's not like I had any measurable, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Like keys or some kind of
Like
uh,
yardstick?
yardstick to the universe before I was born.
Mhm.
No, you're not even alive. There's nothing to you. Once you're dead, you're dead.
Mhm.
There's nothing else. There is no eternal consciousness. You can't prove it. Therefore, again, talking about something that is a non thing is kind of pointless because you can say, oh, I can go live with fairies on the planet Xenu or whatever. I can be like, okay, well, have fun believing whatever you're going to think. I can't really talk about something like that. It's too far out of any kind of rational conversation.
Mhm. Well,
Really.
with that word proof, though, I feel like we both have
But
tried to
again,
provide evidence, right?
again,
Evidence
it's what we
for,
can actually show. You're born on X date, you will die on Y date,
right,
and what is in between is your life. That is quantifiable.
right.
That is what I call proof.
Okay. So,
Okay, what you do in between those two dates is proof of your life.
mhm.
Simple enough. I hope so.
It is simple. I think that it's to the point and very concise. I just wonder, when you say that, I think that the atheist position objects to a believer's position, says, "Oh, you guys are just afraid of death.
Yes,
You guys are afraid of
I,
what's
I think that is the case.
on the other side of death." Well, what if the believer then goes around and then objects to the atheist, says, "No, you guys are actually afraid of life because you just think that it's just about knowing what's in this life, and there's no knowledge whatsoever outside of this life."
I would say that we celebrate the only life that we know we have and enjoy it while you have it, is the response I'd have to something like that.
I just think that you guys, sure, the philosophy of materialism, of there being a birth date and a death date, the morality of relativism in some ways, or the kind of some of the fruit of atheism as far as there being secularism or social Darwinism to politics. I think eventually you begin to realize that it is in some way a belief system.
But it's not. Again, and we've gone down this road, because to say you're an atheist basically is again saying that no one has presented me evidence to believe in a God. It's as simple as that. It's an atheist, being non-theist. I do not believe in gods. No one has presented me with evidence to believe in gods.
Well, and I think that's where maybe we should go to is you said from the beginning how it is difficult for you to argue in the negative for a negative position.
It's not the easiest thing to do. Let's be real.
Hmm.
I mean, normally you do put the onus on the person making the positive assumption to prove what they're saying, not the opposite. By anything we do in life, someone comes up to you, so it's, hey, Rob, you know what? I can fly. You'd be like, really? Show me.
Hmm.
So first thing you're gonna say,
Right.
show me, right?
Show.
I mean, your buddy comes up to you, go, geez, man, I can fly. Like, let's go. Let's show me. Right? It's the automatic first thing, except with
Sure, it's like,
religion.
what's the evidence, or what's
Except
your
with religion.
so what is it with religion then?
It doesn't exist. So you got to create the kind of circular logic that it requires to believe it.
Wouldn't you say there's a circular logic to atheism? Because you're arguing in the negative. You're saying, well, because there's no evidence for God, then God doesn't exist. And then you're
I know, but
saying,
that was just the topic of today's conversation. It was proving the negative, so it was like a little bit like kind of backwards. But again, that's just the way that we chose to do the format today.
I think part of it too is okay, at least from the position I'm holding, is okay, what's the historical evidence? What's the anthropological evidence? What's the archaeological evidence? What's the manuscript evidence? What's all of this evidence pointing towards this one figure?
But I mean,
As far as,
the historical evidence clearly shows that man creates gods. Does it not?
well, I would certainly say that that is a pattern across all cultures. Is that
Yes,
man is obsessed with eternity.
and creating gods, because we've created thousands of them and dismissed thousands over our
But wouldn't you say
existence.
that I'm at least in the position where I can go to the Hindu temple or the Buddha or to any of these gods,
Hmm.
I could say, you know what? They have a little bit of truth in there about, you know, desire leads to suffering, or detach, or serve the poor, or whatever it is. They have a little bit of truth in them. But isn't the atheist position saying, no, you guys are all blatantly wrong
No,
in your teachings
no,
and about your holding to there being
no.
some type of God?
All religions have good in them. Absolutely, I can't take that away. All religions have good things in them. That's what makes them appealing. But it's when they've slid in the slavery, when they slid in the genocides and this and that, mixed in with all the good, to just be able to say, well, we've done all this good. Don't worry about a few little blemishes in there. That's it's water under the bridge. That's where I got an issue with it. And again, we discussed this topic before, but to have any religion out there condone slavery, condone owning people as property, that their morality stops instantly when that conversation continues on and they're trying to justify that position.
Well, that's part of the human condition. I mean, what the heart desires, the mind justifies, and the will chooses. To say, though, to lay that slavery is just a result of religious
No,
thinking.
I'm not saying it's as a result. I'm just
I
saying
know,
it's been condoned.
Sure, but that's overly simplistic. But because wouldn't you say that rather the wars of this world have been about either ethnic or economic?
Okay.
And just to say, well, oh no, but it's the religions that condone them or the religions that cause them. I think is a
What if the religions added fuel to the fire, like they clearly have done?
sure they
Look,
added a little bit of
look,
fuel, but
look at the Roman Catholic Church in World War II. You think that was a little bit of fuel? I think that was a whole pile of fuel.
so sure there've been, but
A whole pile of fuel.
once again though, let's look at the history of the Soviet Union or of Pol Pot in Cambodia or of certain people who have.
But again, let's finish this one first.
Okay.
Look at the Roman Catholic Church in World War II, and they clearly backed the Nazis.
Well, there was a split. You can look it up. There was a group called the Confessing Church that tried to assassinate Hitler.
The majority was with the Nazis.
Tom, I can guarantee you that consensus does not equal truth, and I think you agree.
Okay, listen, I'm not saying consensus makes things right.
I know, but I'm saying, look, there is, no matter how dark the actions are done in the name of Christianity, they're still in contradiction to the founder. And
the Roman Catholic Church celebrated Hitler's birthday.
Well, okay, but Hitler called himself God's representative on earth and said that Jesus was an Aryan.
And the Vatican said okay?
Well, they had the wool pulled over their eyes, and sometimes they still do, and it's the same with any of the churches. There's always an. I mean, I'm not going to naively say the church is it doesn't have a checkered past. That's for sure. I think, though, back to your point is, I want to highlight. Look up the Confessing Church. Look up what this group of pastors and other people did to at least try to assassinate Hitler.
Yeah, there was a few attempts. Let's be real.
There were tons of attempts, and Christians like Corrie Ten Boom who hid Jews away from the concentration camps. All that to say is, back to my point is like, sure, the church, the consensus of the Roman Catholic Church might have been swayed that way in one point, but there's always an opposition to it.
You know, there was one famous quote that came out of the concentration camp. You know, if there is a God, he's got a lot of explaining to do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right?
But so do the people who push the button on the gas chamber. So do the people who created a culture. I think you can only point your finger at God so long before you begin to realize.
I followed orders.
There's a lot of people who are complicit besides
I followed orders.
Nazi Germans.
I followed orders.
Right. And at the Nuremberg trial, it said you're held to a law above the law of the land. So that eventually will not hold up.
I don't think so. Are you going to follow orders? Someone's got a gun to your head, and if you don't follow orders, you're going to be killed. What are you going to do?
Well, if I view death as the ultimate end, then I'm going to be scared out of my mind and try to go with whatever someone who's holding a gun to my head says.
It's the only thing you know. It's the only thing, again, we can prove.
Right, but I'm still holding to a moral absolute that says the preservation of life is ultimately sacred because...
But the only thing that's going to happen in a situation is you're going to end up dead because someone's going to replace you. It's going to push that button. So you've done nothing but take yourself out of the gene pool by not pushing the button.
Well, if my ultimate goal is just to further the gene pool, then I just should...
No, I'm saying just to survive yourself.
Make daily donations to a sperm bank, and that's all.
No, I'm saying in a situation like that where you know if you don't follow orders, you're dead, and someone will replace you to push the button.
I think the impetus.
And this was a real situation. We're not talking something hypothetical. This was real.
Right, but the impetus for resistance in that moment is that there is a recognition of malevolence, of real evil being done.
Of course.
You eventually...
But again, what choice do you have aside from essentially committing suicide?
Well, that's an interesting option because I think that a German pastor, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, said that you do have to take on a sort of lesser evil in trying to assassinate Hitler because he's trying to kill other people, and he's doing it indiscriminately. And so you can either dive towards despair or think through.
So now, can I not relate that to religion today, and trying to and atheists saying that religion and religions in general are trying to kill intellect and advancement in humanity, and we have a moral obligation to stop it from doing so.
I would say that's akin to the French Revolution. Um, these are people who are very educated.
But we have evidence of this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but okay. So what's the evidence?
Look at again in the Arab world when everything stopped because of one cleric. All advancements in science and mathematics and everything stopped because of one cleric.
But that
So
wasn't.
we have clear an example of this happening. So again, why would we allow the stagnation of knowledge to that degree of happening if we can stop and if we can eliminate it ever potentially happening again? I think we have a moral obligation to do so. Don't you? What
Well,
could have been done in 1,000 years in the Arab world if that cleric didn't say what he did? I think quite a bit, don't you? Considering that they've already named 2/3 of the stars in the sky, invented algebra and a slew of other things, and they just stopped. 1,000 years has gone by. They've created nothing. How many Nobel Prizes have come out of the Arab world compared to the rest?
well, yeah.
Hardly any.
There was a dark ages for them as well.
But they're still in them. They're
Well,
still in them, Rob.
Okay, but how are we going to just kind of thought police them, or kind of be able to say that,
It's called education. You
so
have to educate people.
certainly there's education, but at a certain point you have to ask, okay, what are the checks and balances to what's being taught? I think that Hamas and what they teach their children is probably not the same goal as what we in this side of the world would want our children to be taught. They teach them some pretty horrific things about how to view those in Israel or in the occupied territory of Palestine.
Sure, but if you were born and raised there, that would be normal to you, and vice versa. If you were a Jew living on the occupied territories or whatever you call them, looking at the Palestinians, going, what? Let's get these guys out of here. They're on our land. It goes both ways.
To a point, there's still people on both sides who do notice the absurdity of the endless cycle of violence there, and who try to work
first off, Israel came to be after World War II. It was a British-controlled territory, and there was a slew of European Jewish refugees that were essentially not wanted anywhere in the world. And they had to find a place for these people. So the British basically divided this territory that they had in the Middle East at the time and gave it to the Jews of, essentially displaced refugees from Europe. And that's where they went.
Mm-hmm.
So before that, Israel wasn't even a place.
But it had been before.
Okay, but any number, so were any number of places.
Right.
Geographic borders change all the time. Look at Russia going back and forth with how many numbers of there used to be republics and there used to be all one, and now they've broken away. Now there's it happens. Borders change, but
Right.
again, it's to think that all of this is and for based on somebody's design.
Well, I think getting at a notion of fairness, a notion of justice, or a notion of
why wouldn't you? Again, why wouldn't a god have that notion?
Well, things ought to be a certain way, and they're not. Doesn't that not point to there being an existence of some metaphysical absolute above us, some morality that we cannot we cannot
Or how
take?
about just eternal randomness? There just is no reason why.
Because your experience doesn't tell you that. that it's not just randomness. There is an order and design to this world, that there is fairness and justice, that there
I
is.
don't. My experience does not tell me that, though, Rob. My experience does not tell me
You
that. I know two people right
saying that
now.
implies that it does.
You know why? Because I know two people right now sitting that are in a coma on life support because of COVID. I personally know these two people.
Mm-hmm.
One went to the hospital a day after her 39th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me how that's fair.
It's unfair.
Two small children sitting at home, husband's there, and it doesn't look good. It honestly does not look good for her at all.
Mm-hmm.
There's no fairness. I'm not looking for fairness. I know it's not fair. There's no question about it to me. I'm not expecting fairness.
Mm-hmm.
But if there was a God, I would expect that he would want it to be fair. Why wouldn't he want it to be fair if there is a omnibenevolent God that's all good and doesn't want evil things from happening to good people? That doesn't make any sense to me otherwise.
So then would you say that your objection is that belief in God is just sort of a wish fulfillment or a crutch? Or what exactly is it to help me deal with the unfairness of that 39-year-old
That's
being
one. That's
dead?
one. I think it's also the child brain always wanting some kind of protection, no matter what. Even when when you're alone, when your parents are gone, whatever, that you still want to think that somebody is out there looking after you.
Mhm.
Um, Again, prayer has clearly been shown to not work. In the terminally ill, prayer has been shown to have the opposite effect of making people die faster than non-prayer, as bizarre as that sounds, because people essentially give up
Well,
and
I've
they
seen
go.
studies in the other way though. That
No,
prayer can.
I know. I've clearly read this one and saw it on a few times that prayer in terminally ill people, basically they die faster because they give up.
Mm,
They've now given themselves to their God and they just let themselves go,
mhm.
which does make sense if you think about it, especially if someone knows they're terminally ill.
Wait, that doesn't make sense.
If someone knows they're terminally ill, they're going to want to give up and go be and they're religious and they want to just go be with their God and not be in pain anymore. Yes, it does make sense.
My belief is that God walked this earth, and this earth is good, and life is good. So I want to hold on to life as long as I can.
But if
Instead
you're in
of
pain,
celebrating death.
listen. But again, if you're in pain, dying from a terminal disease, you don't want this life no more. Believe me in this. You don't.
How?
You
Why? Because
don't.
I think that's just despair.
It's not. The quality of life is zero. The quality of life is in a negative. You're always in a state of pain or discomfort. It's not a life anymore. You don't want it anymore. You're done with it. You give up. Believe me in this. It's not easy to witness, but I've seen it.
Maybe that's for some people. I've also seen some people who've gone through the worst suffering and still have a drive to continue to live.
But again, we're talking truly terminal.
Right. And that's where I think that something like euthanasia is such a hotly debated topic
It
because,
shouldn't be.
well, why shouldn't it be? Because I think that a person's
Why
mental,
why why is it? Why shouldn't I have the right to end my life with dignity if I want my doctor to do so and just inject me?
because I think you have to take into account how you're doing psychologically, how you're doing
If it's a rational decision and doctor agrees I'm terminal, I have X amount of time to live and my life is and life quality of my life is garbage, why shouldn't I have the right to end it? And again, in a decent way, in a clinical way. Sure, I can always do it in my own way, but why do I have to do it that way? Why can't we do it in a civilized way? Why? We do it with our pets, but we don't do it with people? That's inhumane.
because we celebrate or we try to
But
affirm
again, we
life
are moral enough to put our pets to sleep so they don't suffer, but we won't do it to people? That doesn't make any sense to me. So we're more moral and more caring, more compassionate with our pets when we put them to sleep because we don't want them to suffer any more than we are with people.
Yeah, because I hold to there being a difference between a human being and an animal.
But again, if the human being is making that choice, that sane, rational choice, that their quality of life is no longer.
Tom, there is nothing.
Why? Who are you to disagree with them?
There's nothing sane nor rational about choosing death.
Yes, there is.
Where? I mean, that's the kamikaze mentality. I mean, no,
No, it's not. Again, but we're talking from a perspective of being comfortable, of living comfortable lives right now. Again, you're talking in
yeah, but
if someone is in a constant state of if
it's a
again,
sliding scale, as you said before, that some people are at 0 or negative, and it's like,
but if and again, if the prognosis is simply a downward spiral until death, why does that person not have the right to choose to die in a decent clinical situation? Why do they have to do it by ODing on something that they've bought on the street, or by gunshot, or by something that's completely self-inflicted, as opposed to having their doctor, which, let's be real, doctors put people to death in jails all the time by by execution. So it's not like a doctor's oath is being stretched in that respect.
it is.
They're
The Hippocratic Oath is to protect life in all forms or all stages. For me, I think the difficult part with euthanasia is that it becomes such a uh, moving target, if you will, of
I really don't think it should be an issue, honestly. Have watching one of my parents, essentially they both died from cancer, but again at the end there is no quality of life. I mean, my dad had dementia and Alzheimer's at the end. There was nothing left of the man I knew at
right.
all.
Yeah.
There really wasn't, and I mean, like he couldn't even. There was no rational thought to even understand that the treatment they're trying to give him is trying to save his life,
Hmm.
and he was just refusing treatment because it hurt.
And I think that's the difference: is a refusal of treatment versus actively
But
trying to
again, he
save life.
doesn't know. He's not doing it consciously. There's no. My dad was not there anymore. All he knew, he basically had the mind of a child. All he knew is this hurts. Don't do it.
Well,
There's no other thought.
right, but you still have to protect that life at that point, because even if there is an absence of thought, there's still a personality there. There's still a person, and
But if this being is suffering,
right.
you're not doing him any favors by keeping him alive. You're not. You're really not. In fact, you're doing him a disservice by making him suffer longer.
Well, yeah, I certainly object to torture, but I don't think that allowing a person to, I mean, yeah, it's their choice, but at the same time, you're just going to say, oh, well, if a doctor says you have 3 weeks to live, then you get to kill yourself on week 2. I don't really, for lack of a better word, that's kind of playing God, or playing just Russian roulette with a kind of,
So if a consensus of 3 doctors says you have 3 weeks to live, and there is no chance of you getting better, and you're only going to get worse and die, why can't you take your life on week 2?
because I haven't talked to that 4th doctor.
And what? How many are you going to go through before you're going to basically run out of time and die, essentially?
Well,
As,
isn't that kind of what we,
as opposed to going out on your own terms.
well, I think that's where we disagree, is that life isn't about going out on your own terms. We didn't choose to be here.
But
You know,
why can't you? Why can't I go out on my terms? Why does it have to be on some miserable deathbed dying of some crippling disease? Why can't I die on my own terms?
because we're trying to drive away from despair, or kind of a pathologizing life.
I agree, but once you're at that point, there
Mhm.
really is not much more.
It's
You're
kind of
you're going down.
right. Yeah, I mean, you're going down, and you're coming to grips with your mortality, but I think that it's about protecting life at all
But
stages.
you're not. Again? You're trying to protect something that is unhealthy. You're
We're
trying to
still
protect something that doesn't want to be anymore, which
right.
doesn't make sense to me. It's going against what nature essentially wants to do.
I don't think it is. I think nature has given us a lot of ways to heal, and for us to say that we know
Oh,
exactly what our
Rob,
next day.
no. Nature wants you dead. Let's be real. In more than one way. We've expanded our lifespans. Nature by itself, we'd still be dying of tooth decay, of childbirth.
Hmm.
50% of children died of childbirth back in the day, right? Who changed that?
But
We
I
did.
think we did. But I think if you're going to just put a culture of death over all of creation and say that it's just out to get us, out to kill us, I think that you eventually have
No,
some
but
scary.
I'm saying nature in itself is not all loving. Nature wants you to like look at this earth. Majority of it is sorry. Uh,
Inhabitable.
yes, sorry. I don't know why that word's not coming to me. But yeah,
Uninhabitable.
inhabitable. There you go. And above 14,000 feet, I need a gas mask or I'm going to pass out. So we're limited to a small area here, and anything else is going to kill you.
You're
And
right.
even in that area, there's deserts that are going to kill you, and there are other spots that are completely inhabitable, or that will just not conducive to life. The poles are not conducive to life. You or I
So
would not survive. We're not
you would
Inuit.
you would say, Tom, then that our power within this creation is ordered. There's an ordering to it as far as how much we can survive at certain altitudes or in certain habitats. And so therefore we adjust accordingly and we adapt. Now,
Because
I
we
think
can.
well, right, we observe and we know and we try to go at it from different ways,
Trial and error.
trial and error, but I
You
don't.
go above a certain point, you're going to pass out. You better come down.
Right, exactly. So there is a certain target that we have. But I think to go back to our topic on euthanasia, I think that that is a simply in the realm of science like eugenics, where we're just gonna
Not.
do
It's really
away with
not.
those who are
It's not.
incapacitated or
It.
who can't contribute.
I
Right?
see it
A,
again.
a person's value is what they can contribute, and if
Okay,
a person,
so what about Inuit today that put people that are essentially dying on ice floes, and they voluntarily go because they're no longer contributing members to society. They can no longer hunt. They can no longer do anything. It's time for them to go on the ice floe, and that's that. What do you think of that? And that happens today still
mhm, well, I think that's
as part of
wrong.
their society. Why? Who are you to say?
Right, because I'm not an Inuit. So I think you're getting at, well, who's to say if the Nazi Germans had won that they had a better idea of eugenics?
But what I'm trying to say is here, no one's imposing this on that person. They have voluntarily taken themselves out of the society because they've realized they're no longer a contributing member. They are just there. They don't want to be there anymore. They want to either be a contributing member or not be there. Life is not worth living at that point in time for them.
But you would say too that
There's no eugenics involved.
their mental capacity or their mental status at that time is really in a tough place. And I get it. Suffering hurts and we don't want to be anywhere near it. And it's very uncomfortable. But to say that therefore they are in a place where they can make a decision like that, it's
Why can't they, Rob? Why don't they have the right to end their life? It's theirs to end.
because then you can just start applying that to all sorts of parts of life. Oh,
But
these people over here, they didn't.
no. We're talking about certain end of life situations where, again, in an extreme climate situation like that, if you're not a contributing member to society, then everyone has to take care of you. They have to hunt for you. They have to do everything for you, and it doesn't work. They realize that their society would break down if too many of those people were there. They simply couldn't take care of them.
I just think the 20th century is full of lessons of social Darwinism that makes us concerned about whether it's the Inuits or the Nazis, whoever it is. That's often people.
But again, no one's imposing this on the Inuit.
Well, maybe we shouldn't have imposed our morality on the Nazis either. Maybe we should have just let them be. I don't think so.
Again, if you today say, you know what, Tom, I just found out, and it's been confirmed by multiple doctors that I only got 3 weeks left to live. I'm gonna make the best 2 weeks, and after that, I'm gonna end it myself. You know what, dude? I couldn't fault you for it. Why would I fault you for it? You've made the best you can out of it, and you don't want to die in some hospital deathbed. You want to go out how you want to go out on your own accord. What's
I
wrong with that? You
Yeah,
know when your end date is. You have the benefit of knowing when your end date is.
I
Most
think
of us don't.
Ernest Hemingway kind of took that approach, and I think that certain people do, and I think it's bad art, let alone bad faith. I think
Why?
that because you have to, well, if we're going back to this whole idea of not despairing in life, and just not going quietly into the night, it's
Mhm.
like, well, why? Why not just off yourself now? Why wait?
No, because
Till-
it gets to a certain point that you have no choice. It gets to a certain point that you're going into the night whether you like it or not. The party, you're forced. You have to leave the party, and it's going to go on, and that's it. You don't have that option. The choice is not yours anymore. At that point in time, you have the right to say, you know what, I've had a good run. I'm done.
I don't think you just somehow receive the right at some point. I mean, maybe
Again, if you know the end is coming and the end is not pretty, why don't you have the right to go out with decency, man? Why?
because then it becomes a decency according to who? According to yourself? I mean,
According to you, you want to go out like this. I've confirmed with multiple doctors. I'm not going to live past 5 months, 6 months, whatever it is. I want to go out decent. I don't want to put a gun to my head.
well, I think you're just highlighting a belief in science and the doctor as the authoritative source when
I'm
it
not
comes.
telling one doctor. I'm telling a multiple doctors have confirmed that you're terminal. You're not going to survive.
Right, but well, consensus doesn't always point to truth. It just sometimes points to what's going on in a
Listen,
certain.
obviously, do
You're
things
gonna have
happen? Yes.
doctors give you a month to live. I'm gonna hold my breath. I'm gonna say, Tom, keep holding on for a month and tell me what happens after day 31 and get back to me. I'm gonna say, keep
See, I'm going to
pushing.
be at 3 weeks. If I see me going down, I don't want to see the end the way that end is.
But for your kids or for somebody else, I mean, I think that's where we have to.
Well,
We're
why not
walking.
just, like I said, just like I've done for my pets back in the day? Why not just put them to sleep with decency? Not watch them suffer in a corner and die. Put them to sleep. Let them. That's it. And there's no more suffering involved.
Well,
Again, you take the humanitarian approach with your pets, but you don't do it with with people. That's the most puzzling thing about this conversation. It is truly puzzling to me because
and that's why
again, we're talking about humanity, treating people decently, not letting them die from something that's miserable, and there is no cure. We know this person. There's no option. They're done, and it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. They've chosen to end it in a decent manner, the way that they want to do. There's nothing wrong with that, Rob. There's
I would
nothing
just
wrong with that at all.
okay. Well, it ain't over till the fat lady sings, and so as a
But
Christian, I
again,
can't.
you're chewing it. You're choosing it.
I'm choosing it, but I'm also saying, okay, if you're going to follow that line of thought, you're going to have to look at the fruit of what atheism does as far as celebrating death, as death is
Why do
something
we
that
celebrate death?
that ends the absurdity of life. That we have a birth date and a death date, and then everything else in between is just an absurd tragedy. And particularly at the end, if you are losing your mind or you are in some type of really uncomfortable situation.
Which most are. Let's be real.
Well, okay, so there's the off yourself, and then there's also the articles that come out about these mass shooters is like, well, let's see what the motive was that they had. It's like maybe they didn't have a motive. Maybe they just so pathologized life and just said everything in this life is meaningless to me, and I'm just going to make other people suffer as a result. That's my own prerogative. It's like, whoa, so that's a motive? No, I think that's just an assertion that you think everything is meaningless, and that's a dangerous path to go down.
But again, and I've said this before, we have everything to live for, nothing to die for, because we think that this life is the only thing we have. And again, it's one thing that we know is quantifiable that we can measure is this life that we have. We don't know of an afterlife. No one's ever come back to tell us. So you can't say that that is there. You can say that you were born. You can say you're going to die. You can say that what is in between is your life. But that's all you can say for fact. So why would you say that we want death when that is essentially the exact opposite of what we want? I'd say that it's the religious that want this life to be over so they can go be with their God and be in heaven with their God for eternity. That is the ultimate goal of the religious, is it not?
I would say that that's a radical misunderstanding, because if you
Why?
look at because if you look at the tenets of atheism versus theism, there's very much, whether it's Friedrich Nietzsche, Karl Marx, any of these guys who talk about the despair and the way in which,
Atheism doesn't have tenets. It's just saying we haven't been presented with enough evidence to prove in a God. What tenets does that require?
well then, and that's what I was trying to get at with this conversation, was saying, okay, well, let's hear what the evidence is that there is no God.
Right.
Because
So the fact of all these of an omnipotent being not being a possibility even by its own definition, having an omniscient being with free will, that by definition can't happen. So you have a married bachelor over and over and over again, and I'm saying this is impossible, this cannot exist.
where are the married bachelors? Because I think you're just making assertions, not arguments. You're saying, by definition,
Omniscient versus how can you be omniscient and have free will in the same being? How can you know what's going to happen tomorrow and have the free will to change your mind what's going to happen tomorrow? It's in the same boat. That's impossible. That's a married bachelor. That is
so
absolutely impossible. Either
so
you're omniscient or you have free will. You can't have both.
eternal first cause that is outside of time, space, and matter
That it cannot exist.
cannot see all of time,
But that cannot exist.
cannot have a choice to live in relationship with that creation. How could that not exist?
Do you not understand that nothing can be outside of space and time? That is a realm that is a non thing. So nothing could be there.
That's what the answer that our discovery of dark matter has provided.
Yes.
Tommy, we're having a two-dimensional conversation. If we were to meet in three-dimensional and talk about another dimensional, do you think that's within the realm of reason?
Sure, why not?
So that's what I'm positing and saying, that there's a first cause outside of the dimensions that we're in right now.
But you can't, because that's a supernatural realm that we're discussing right now. That you can't even.
You
That
are making
isn't.
a supernatural claim yourself, aren't you?
Where?
By saying that it can't. It can't possibly be that way.
But there's nothing supernatural about my claim of saying that your claim is supernatural. What am I missing here? I'm saying that you're claiming the supernatural, and I'm saying that that is not possible.
Right. So what is, and for me, I cannot figure this out as far as why is that so not plausible?
Because it's never proven to be true ever. It's never been a plausible answer to any question. Supernatural answers are not answers. It just creates more questions. There's no such thing as a supernatural answer to any question we've ever had. Name one.
I need you to give an example, because I'm kind of confused by that.
So, if the first event required a supernatural agent to start, where does the supernatural agent come from outside of space and time? That nothing could have existed outside of space and time. It's a contradiction in terms.
No, so you're highlighting the infinite regress. Okay, so we think about, let's just call it infinity. Is infinity the end of infinity an odd or even number?
That's a silly question.
Right. So I'm trying to say too that you're kind of coming up with a silly theory here, as far as saying that, well, the first cause has to have a cause itself.
No, that's what you're saying.
No, you just gave an example of an infinite regress of, well, who created God? Is there another God before another bigger God before the first cause? Is that what you're kind of objecting
No,
to?
no, no. What I'm trying to say is nothing can have been before time itself.
Nothing.
Saying that something was before time and space itself is an oxymoron. It cannot exist. It's
How
an
so?
absolute contradiction.
How so?
Because you cannot have something that exists before time and space exists. You cannot have something existing before everything exists. Something cannot be when nothing is. You can't.
I agree with that. Like, so there's life comes from life, not non-life. You can't just have nothingness produce a bunch of something. So that's where we're holding to. In the beginning, God, or there was a creation. There was something that began in the beginning.
But
So
okay, but there might not have been a cause. Not necessarily a cause. Like we came back to the quantum mechanics or quantum physics. Things happen in quantum physics that are not normal, that don't make sense. So in that singularity point of when everything started, when time started, when space started, you're looking at it from a macro level, not on a quanta level right now, which is normal for us because that's all we can visually see. We don't live our lives in the quantum mechanics world. It would be too weird,
mhm.
right? So at that singularity point, there's a very good chance that there was no cause for what happened. It just happened. Why do you need an external supernatural agent to flip the switch? Why can't you just not say, you know what? It just happened because quantum mechanics actually works like that and they can prove it.
I mean, I would love to hear how they prove it, because I think that the notion of,
Check out Lawrence Krauss with his quantum mechanics speech. It's a little out there, but yeah, it's he'll go into it, and again, it's pretty deep.
yeah, I mean, I certainly, and I it's a lot of science that I don't know how
Oh,
to get with,
it's
but
tough.
I do think that what Pythagoras said in regards to this universe being set in numbers,
That's
there
just
is,
that's something that we've seen. We look for patterns. Come on,
well, sure,
the universe doesn't care about math.
sure, the universe doesn't care about math. What are you talking about, Tom?
No, the universe doesn't care about anything we've come up with.
Uh-huh.
Math is an abstract thing that we've come up with.
No, Occam's razor is a good logical argument, but then there's also a razor for the how life is balanced. Whether if the moon blew up, we'd be all screwed. So I just say
Sure, but I'm
number.
saying that the universe itself doesn't care about mathematics. You didn't hear the word care.
It absolutely cares about numbers. I mean, that's why we're sending people
No,
into space.
we look at it under the scope of and the goggles of numbers of mathematics to be able to understand it. But that's not necessarily how it actually works, right? That's not how we have developed a system by which to understand what we're seeing. But that's
Right.
not necessarily how things work. Same with time. We've created time. The
We,
whole notion of time is a man-made construct. We don't have any idea what time even is
I would just say that mathematics has a universality to it.
based on us.
Points. I
Based
don't
on
know.
us.
I don't know if Isaac Newton and everybody else would agree. I don't know if it's based on us. I think there is a
Well, if we
ob-
didn't exist, what mathematics would there be in the universe? None. There'd be no one to calculate anything,
right.
right? You need a
I
mathematician to be able to understand math.
There you
Therefore,
go.
you need a brain.
So that's why I say my faith is more in math than in science, because I think that science has it today has a type of elitism to it at some points. That mathematics has such a
So what's the god
hard
of math?
rigidity to it. Well, then you're getting at the really you're getting at some singularity there. Um, I just, yeah, it's a fascinating thing, study of math as far as how the universe operates on
It
certain.
explains a lot, but at the at some theoretical level, it's very difficult to follow. I'm not gonna lie. Either you're in that field or it's so out there theoretically that it's extremely difficult to continue on with
Simplicity,
certain ideas.
some ideas. There's a beautiful simplicity to some of it, as far as it's able to get stuff done, and you
Yes.
see the functioning of it in very clear ways. And it goes back to a little bit of our DNA discussion, as far as there seems to be a comprehensible pattern to it that points to, once again, some type of designer.
And again, I still will reply if that's the case. I can think of a much better design right now, and we're better off because that designer was pretty crap.
And that point, I think you're right. The universe operates on laws that are not always in our best interests, whether
A
it's
lot of the time, most of the time, I'd say.
right. And so, even though we would desire them to be another way, that they aren't always the case, whether it's tectonic plates shifting or uh, lack of oxygen in certain places. So, I think that's a fair point. And that gets at too, for on the Christian side of grappling with this notion of sin or of brokenness, of a curse. And I know that kind of sounds hokey and superstitious, but I think when you grapple with a level of wickedness or suffering, you begin to see the nothingness in it, and then you begin to look at the patterns in life and say, okay, well, where's this pattern taking me, that I continue to celebrate life even when I'm been told I only have 3 weeks to live.
Can you imagine a universe without a god?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Like, what kind of universe you positing?
I don't know. I'm asking you. Can you imagine a universe that there is no god? That God did not create everything that you see. That there just is no God.
Are you kind of playing at, like, okay, you just have a drive for agency, Rob? You're always looking for a reason for everything.
No, I'm more trying to get at that we've created working concepts of the universe that have no need for any supernatural agent. So why do you need it? Is what I'm trying to get at. We've created multiple models of universes that work without any supernatural agents having any play. I mean, all of them, really. So why do you need it? What is?
Well, I think at a certain point, it's like, okay, if those are coherent models and really explain well our experience, then I think at a certain point you have to say, okay, I could explore that more, and what the implications of that are. Um, but once again, we
Could,
keep.
could could you wake up tomorrow and live your life as though there were no God?
Well,
There's
you're
no
getting.
God watching you.
I think you're
You don't have a moral superpower judging what you do on a daily basis.
then my mind is God then, or is this sort
Yes.
of?
Yeah. You can. You're your own master.
I mean, I think that it's attractive, especially if I if I can get to do whatever I want to do all the time. I just think
As
that,
long as you're not hurting anybody else, obviously. But you are your own master.
right, but I think that the explaining power of that kind of goes away when I look at my experience of, say, something like delayed gratification in the
Okay.
lives of successful people, how they're able
Okay.
to delay gratification and survive.
Okay.
It's fascinating. And is heaven just another form of delayed gratification?
No, because they see delayed gratification generally comes with more than if it were immediate. So even if you look at it from a mentally selfish perspective, you're getting more by being a little bit patient.
You don't know that though.
No, but that's the hope.
That's Blaise Pascal's wager.
But that's the hope of the delayed gratification, is that you have to have some kind of you have to have some kind of idea or some kind of a notion at least that you will get more by waiting. Otherwise, there's no benefit in waiting, and you might as well take whatever's going to get at that time for immediate gratification if the amount is going to be identical. If the amount, if I can only make $10 today by doing whatever deal, and I can only make $10 in a year from now, well, I might as well just take it today. Why wait the year? I'm not gaining anything.
Well, and I think that's the mathematical dilemma that we face sometimes is, one now or three later. How do we know it's going to be three later? And I bring up Blaise Pascal because he did
Again, you have to have the notion. Again, if you know you're not going to gain anything, it's simple. Just take it now. There's nothing gained by waiting.
Right, but that implies that you're omniscient.
No, but you have to have some kind of an idea that what you're waiting for is going to be more than what you can have now. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it, right? Like, that's just straight common sense.
Yeah, and I think that's where I was kind of getting
to. If I can put $1,000 in my pocket today versus waiting and only put $1,000 in my pocket a year from now from the same deal, why would I wait a year? And now, even if I just thought, you know what, the guy gave me a really good vibe. I got a chance I can make $3,000 on this deal in a year's time, as opposed to putting only $1,000 in my pocket now. You know what? Let's do it. Let's go for it. Worst case scenario, I'll still put $1,000, but there's a potential of me putting $3,000. Mm-hmm. Why wouldn't I do it?
Yeah, you're getting into a game of probability. I think you take into account the evidence, and then you look at, okay, this notion of delayed gratification. How do I exercise enough self-control to
you quantify it? That's what you have to do.
You're right. You have the mathematical aspect of it, but eventually you kind of look at it like, okay, what's the best answer given all the evidence? Usually the one that's most simple. And if you kind of get back to the singularity of this universe, of this place having a beginning and everything else, you can talk about multiverses, you can talk about there not being anything, but it would certainly seem that the most simple answer that takes into account all of the evidence, the best answer is that there is a first cause.
Okay, so let me ask you this. If science explains that first cause through scientific means, are you cool with it?
I'll be ready to listen to what it is, because I think that would be
if it stands the scrutiny of scientific peer review. Would you be cool with dismissing your God now as unnecessary in that working model?
I would like to hear what it is, but I also would
obviously I would too.
Right.
We're talking hypothetical here, right? Like if something has gone through the scientific peer review and been accepted as, well, this works. Would you at that point be prepared to say, you know what, there's just no need for a God anymore? They've explained it.
Okay, so if they come up with one, if the scientists come up with it, I would go running to the mathematicians and the physicists and some of the other branches of knowledge that look into this and say, does this match? Because
and what if it does?
Well, then there would be all the evidence leading to say that there is no God.
Right. Would you accept it at that point in time? Or would you, because I know people that wouldn't. I got a good buddy that still wouldn't, says it. He goes, I don't care how much evidence you give me, I'm not going to change my mind.
Do you feel that way? About
for who? For him?
No, about your position. That if all the evidence was presented that there is a God, would you run away from it?
No, I'd be stupid to.
Right.
I will follow where the evidence leads.
Right.
But right now, it's clearly showing that the evidence is with science and with the knowledge that science has given us. And again, we're down to that little point of that singularity that is unexplainable right now. What happened at that point? Most of everything else we've got. We have an explanation for on the macro and the micro levels. It's just that one point that we're not there yet. But when we do get there, and that is explained, and I'm sure it will be explained, maybe not in my lifetime, it will be explained given how much they've explained thus far. I don't know. Again, I have a good friend of mine that says even that will not change my mind about God. And I'm like,
But
okay.
that's a big faith claim that eventually science will explain away everything.
Look how much knowledge we've gained in the last 100 years, Rob.
Sure, there's a not a
Yeah.
bell curve. There's it's more of a
Uh,
singularity.
Yeah.
I think that is an amazing testament to
Again,
this.
it might not, it clearly will not be in my lifetime. I hope it is, because I'd love to see it. But again, to say that it's not going to happen is also arrogant too.
Oh,
Is
no, I'm not.
discrediting science for what they've done so far. And again, we're down to that one point right now. We know the massive inflationary.
I think you have to explain that. How are we down to that one point that all of a sudden science is the savior of humanity?
No, I'm saying science has explained everything except for the point of the singularity. Science can explain what happened because Einstein's theory of relativity breaks down at the moment of singularity, and quantum physics cannot completely explain the moment of singularity either. So we don't have a unified theory right now that explains what happened at that second in the singularity that started everything. But I'm saying once it started, the fraction of a second after that thing popped, we now know. We know everything up until that point. We just don't know what happened then. Once we get,
That's kind of what Stephen Hawking posited, right? That we
yes,
kind of have that. So I mean, that's his theory,
it
and
holds true.
it's a working theory. It's not exactly holding true entirely. I think that you have to look at
Why not?
because he he's a great scientist, but some of his philosophy is a little bit flawed in thinking that just the scientific branch of knowledge is going to explain away everything else, every other question.
I think he's dead on.
Well, I think that's where we probably disagree, obviously. So let me go back and read some more of Stephen Hawking, and I got to read some of Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre because I think they have like
If you haven't, A Brief History of Time, I highly recommend it.
okay, brief history of time. Okay,
It's a tough read though.
right?
It's tough.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sure. He kind of says that he created time, but he also talks about the mind of God. So I'm curious about that. I'm just curious to see.
It's basically just it's talking about knowledge, explaining, just trying to show an analogy between ultimate knowledge is what he's talking about, the mind of God.
That's something I can hold on to because that's how I feel like our story begins. We want a knowledge of good and evil, so we bit the fruit. It's rotten. All right, Tom. Well, it was great talking with you.
Likewise, Rob. We'll schedule it next time around, and yeah, it's been fun. Thank you so much.
All right, have a good one.
You too.
Bye.
Bye bye.